Hello and welcome back after a long break to the Partial Historians. Please join me on this journey as we trace the history of Rome from the founding of the city. And as my co-pilot, I have a ravishing creature to my right.
Why, thank you. Yes, I'm back.
Yes.
I've returned from many adventures. Yeah. Just in time, since I think a podcast is overdue.
Definitely,
really.
yes. It was rather hard to do there with Dr. G travelling internationally like the woman of mystery that she is.
It was tough. Hanging out in Rome, checking out ruins.
Exactly. So we're going to have a special episode next episode where we talk to Dr. G about her travels and experiences in Italy. But for now, we are going to return to the life story of Coriolanus.
Oh yeah, we're right in the middle of something big here, I think.
We kind of are, yeah. His whole life story is really building to a climax.
Oh, in the way that men's lives generally build to climax. Yes, I believe so. But where exactly were we at the end of our last episode?
Well, see, our last episode we kind of did a bit of a tidy up and we sort of looked at the sources that we're dealing with Coriolanus. But the episode before that, we were talking about this particular instance where, about the city of Velitrae, or the town of Velitrae, I should perhaps say, where basically we've got some conflicting accounts about what is going on in this city. All right. According to my account in Livy, for example, the Volsci were ready to attack Rome, as they often are, because Rome was at a bit of a low point, what with all the conflict of the orders and famine and whatnot. But plague strikes them, okay, and so they can't attack. And in the meantime, the Romans decide to sort of have a bit of a buffer zone set up between them and their enemies by founding a new settlement at Velitrae.
How convenient.
Indeed, yes. There is a slightly more extended version. I think you also had a version in Dionysius that talked about this.
Yeah, so the sort of the conflict between like whether this was like an active settlement where they're like, please, like, bring the people.
Yes, exactly.
Or whether it was a forced situation where Rome's like, so we've got some people, and we've noticed that since we've crushed your town, you've got space for them. Yeah,
that's pretty much it. Like in Plutarch, because Plutarch does the biography of Coriolanus, he talks about this in a little bit more detail than Livy does. And he basically talks about how after all the war that's been going on, there is very little food happening in Rome, and as a result, they're finding it difficult to import things because they've been busy with other matters. There's no food around. Even if food were available, people are too broke to buy it. Plutarch actually records that there's like an accusation out there that the rich have actually organised a famine on purpose. So they're trying to bring the plebs to their knees.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And this is when Velitrae comes along and asks for Roman colonists, saying that their population is being so decimated by plague, like 9 out of 10 people, I think, dying is where we settled on last time.
Guys, we're farming our own land still, unlike over there where you're living.
Yeah, and so the Romans
take some of those people.
Yeah, the Romans sort of debate about, well, what are we going to do? Should we do this? Should we not? And the sensible Romans are, of course, in favour of this because having a new colony would ease the demand for food, and also allow them to get rid of the troublesome element, as in the conflict of the orders type situation.
Rounding up all of the most naughty plebs they can find, and the people from the countryside, and basically like, all right, it's going to be like the Great Escape. All of our rotten eggs are going to be in one basket.
Pretty much, yeah. Like the consuls basically select out the troublemakers and they're like, right, you guys get to go and found another settlement of Velitrae.
Guess what? You've been drawn out of the lottery system.
So yeah, that's kind of where we were up to last time, I believe.
Yeah. I think one of the points of note here is that Plutarch's life of Coriolanus, more so than any of his other lives, really does seem to follow Dionysius of Halicarnassus really quite closely. So reading Plutarch is a bit of a mirror, if you like.
Dionysius,
yeah. In terms
good,
of like,
because I haven't read Dionysius.
Well, it's a hefty task and one that takes me quite some time. But yes, this idea of the famine situation and the growing sense of panic and chaos, and obviously shock that's associated with some of these kind of events is actually going to play directly into the politics that follows, and Coriolanus is going to be right in the middle of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, see, in Plutarch's account, I don't know if this matches up with Dionysius's, but basically, whilst all this sort of debate is going about what they're going to do with the colony and that sort of thing, there is a war with the Volscians. Yeah, they decide they're going to keep the troublemakers busy by sort of bringing on a war with the Volscians, because who else would you fight with? And so that reluctantly sort of brings a sort of temporary unity back between the rich and poor. I mean, it's almost, I feel like a little bit of a broken record, I must admit, with this whole conflict of the orders thing, because war is often the thing that binds them together, in their mutual time of need.
Yeah, but it's also not a cheap exercise.
Yeah.
I mean, you still have to feed people, and if people are walking around in a standing army, they're not farming.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly.
So you might
really
be
delaying.
Yeah, saving some of your problems for later.
Yeah.
If you like, with the hope that maybe in the meantime you'll conquer somewhere that has farmland.
I would say it's a Band-Aid solution, but the Romans wouldn't understand that analogy.
Yeah, we're going to have to find a new analogy for them.
Yeah. So it is, it's kind of always coming back to these sorts of same points with this conflict of the orders.
Well, this is, we've been saying this all along, but this is a very hazy period of history. And one of the things that's really clear from that is that nobody's quite sure how anything works. And the order of events is open for debate.
Yeah, I have to say, reading Livy and Plutarch this week, I found it very hard to sort of sometimes match up certain parts of the account. And I admit, listeners, I haven't perhaps done as much research as I'd like to have. But yeah, there's just some real disconnect, I think, sometimes between the accounts. I can't really figure out where chronologically something's meant to be happening sometimes. It just doesn't seem to match up.
So nailing down these sort of things, we'll give you a narrative.
Sure,
Don't you worry, listeners. You will receive some chronology. We're not going to have any claims to accuracy on what actually may have occurred at this point.
I suppose, actually, this is a good point to flag what date we're kind of dealing with here. The listeners, this is exciting. It seems that we might be entering the 480s BC.
We've moved into a whole new decade.
We've inched our way.
We will complete this project before we die.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we're sort of dealing. Roughly speaking, I would say we are dealing with maybe 49-ish. But that's a massive guess.
That is still into the next
decade. No,
I
just mean it's not like late 480s.
No.
Yeah. Early 40s, it doesn't...
Well,
It doesn't make sense. So, anywho, the thing I've got in Livy, which follows on from this whole Velitrae thing, is this... the Romans have managed to get their hands on some corn from Sicily to try and alleviate the famine, okay? Mm-hmm. However, there is a debate about the price of this corn. Okay, with many in the Senate thinking...
Are the Sicilians not, naming their price?
No. I think they've bought the corn. Sorry.
Yes, the corn has been purchased.
The corn has been purchased, but instead of just giving it out to the starving people, the Roman Senate are like, well, maybe we should talk about this. What price are we going to set this at? I mean, there is a famine going on, whatnot.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay, so limited supplies of grain... demand versus supply. Okay,
exactly,
what are we going to set the sale price at?
And this is where it sounds kind of despicable on behalf of the Senate.
This is where it sounds horrific. To be honest,
because basically some in the Senate, in fact, Livy I think goes so far as to say many, believe that they can exploit this situation to get back some of the rights that the plebs have won. Like the whole tribune, I presume, is what they're referring to.
That would be the major one.
Because there aren't many. Yeah. I can't choose from a lot here. They're basically saying, we could exploit this. They want the grain. So maybe we can sort of, hold it ransom in a sense. And until they've agreed to our conditions, no grain, no corn. And Coriolanus is mentioned as being particularly... against the power of the tribunes.
Yeah.
So he would be on behalf of what looks like to me the despicable party.
To me this represents a really fascinating moment because the patricians and the plebs in this particular instance of conflict appear to be almost separate peoples.
It is weird, isn't it?
It's like the patricians are like, no, we are going to ground you down as far as we can in order to
and we
yield
don't care how many of you
nothing.
die in the process.
Yeah, exactly. We do not care how many of you die in the process.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, this is not a cohesive society at all.
No.
This is not even a two-tier system where the patricians represent some sort of legacy and the plebeians are this other group of people.
Yeah.
This is like two different sets of people who live in the same region, and one of them is like, we want to dominate you as much as we can.
Yeah, and I mean, there's even been suggestions, like we've talked before about how we don't really know exactly how did you become a patrician, how did you become a plebeian?
Yeah, the definitions are really hazy.
Yeah, but the other thing is, I mean, I've even heard some historians suggest that there is yet another sector of society that, you know, that aren't the plebeians. You know, that we're not really hearing from either in this period. That, you know, it's not just patricians, plebeians. Like, we often think, I suppose, as plebeians as being everybody who's not patrician. That's the case.
Yeah. Well, there are some assertions that perhaps that we've got a third priestly class, which is distinct and separate again, which may be drawing from patricians or plebeians depending on the nature of the ritual required.
Sure, yeah.
So, the complexities just keep growing, don't they?
And this is just it. Like, you know, as I say, this whole conflict of the order things is just hard to understand without knowing exactly what.
Yes, and particularly given that, like, we talk about it as, like, the struggle of the orders or the conflict of the orders, and that in itself is kind of a reductive way of suggesting that perhaps we have some sort of cohesive hierarchical society on our hands, but maybe we don't. Maybe we have chaos, and maybe we have distinct ethnic groups, and some of them are trying to wipe each other out. Yeah,
well, I mean, this is the thing. I mean, again, we always have to sort of keep in mind just how small scale Rome is at this point in time.
There's like 50 people, guys. Yeah. Like, maximum really 50 people.
Well, it is one of those things, though, that, you know, it sounds like such important... And, you know, and it is. The moral issues in this debate are... They sound so lofty. They sound so epic, you know. But at the same time, we do have to remember that we're probably dealing with a fairly small population at this point in time. And so, yeah, it could very well be that, you know, it's exactly as you say. I mean... It's not like it's empire-wide, through many territories, through continents, you know, it's just Rome. And the small amount of territory that it's managed to, you know, accrue over that time. But, yeah. Anywho.
Bringing this back to Coriolanus, the man of the moment, I've entitled his speech, as I've gone through and highlighted it, Coriolanus against the people.
Nice.
Because he basically gets up, and we've got this period of famine and crisis, and he is so angry that the plebeians have attempted to represent themselves and gain some political leverage.
I know, it's quite crazy, yeah.
It's almost like it's personal for him. Yeah. He's so angry about this.
I guess it is, given he's patrician.
And he doesn't want to give them any quarter whatsoever.
No.
He's like, they should be happy. And he's like, because now we are under a tyranny of them.
Yeah, well,
they are now terrorizing us.
That's exactly the kind of... I mean, Livy's obviously less detailed. He always seems to be, but that's exactly... He sort of likens the whole situation to the Tarquins. He's like, you know, I didn't endure that, so why should I endure this?
I'm not putting up with that from one man, and I'm certainly not putting it up with it from the whole group of
well, he specifically likens... I mean, one of the sort of leaders of the plebeians at this point in time is a guy called Sicinius. And he basically likens the whole... He's like, he basically says, shall I, who could not endure Tarquinius on the throne, endure Sicinius? Sorry, continue with you.
Oh, yeah. No, well, this is exactly where he's heading.
Yeah.
So he basically says, like, these plebeians have asked for tribunician power.
Yeah.
And it was given to them, not so that they could injure the Senate, but so that they could secure for themselves certain powers and, like, rights and obligations within a framework. And he's like, but what they have done since they've got it is use it to injure the Senate.
I kind of argue that food is pretty important.
Well, it's interesting because he's conflating what appears to be the recognition of tribunician power for the plebs with them also gaining the capacity to injure the Senate through acquiring that power.
Yeah.
When the tribunician power was the thing that they sought and negotiated for because they were so dissatisfied and they were refusing to do anything more for the patricians.
Yeah. I would dare say with cause.
Yeah. And so he sees this as grounds for the plebeians actually embarking on what is going to be a destruction of government. He's like, they actually want to take down of the whole Senate. This is their foothold in the door, and we cannot let them go any further.
Yeah, and see, that just... I mean, as we can say, because we're clearly not on Coriolanus' side here. It's unreasonable if what we've got in the sources is true, because Plutarch goes into a lot more detail about this whole debate about the colony. And he talks about how the popular leaders, so the people sort of representing the plebs, Sicinius and Brutus, basically say that this whole idea of sending out troublemakers to a colony is, once again, showing the blatant disregard that the patricians have for the well-being of the plebs, because not only are they, sending them out to this settlement against their will, because basically they're told to go or they'll be punished harshly, really, really harshly. But they're essentially also, they're saying, being put at risk because this is a plague, this is a plague situation. So by sending them out, he's like, you clearly have no regard for their well-being. You're sending them to a place where, there's been this horrible, horrible plague, and you don't seem to care that they might get sick, that they might die, that they might be wiped out. You've also orchestrated a war. You've also orchestrated a famine. And it's not that I necessarily believe that the rich orchestrated a famine, but the war, maybe.
The war, definitely. Yeah. Because the Senate gets to decide on war.
Yeah.
But certainly this idea that sending out these people to a situation which is dangerous for their well-being on every level strikes me, and this might be ungenerous of me, Coriolanus, but I'm guessing it's not. It's precisely for those reasons that somebody like Coriolanus would be interested in sending them there, because they're kind of hoping they will die.
Yeah, and that's just it. Like in Plutarch, basically the people are saying, look, we're not going to do this. We're not going out to this colony. And we also refuse to enlist to serve in this war because this is just, once again, serving you. And as I say, this is Plutarch's version of things. And the Senate is, really perplexed, don't really know what to do. And Coriolanus, of course, comes to the fore being really arrogant about it, takes the lead. The elite really admire him for his stance on things. And the colony basically ends up being dispatched because of this situation of, look, we're going to choose you by lot and you go, otherwise you stay and get brutally punished. And the people who are refusing to fight, well, Coriolanus in Plutarch's account says, you know what, I'm just going to use whoever will volunteer and my clients, and I will lead an attack. And he does. He basically does. And he secures corn, cattle, and captives. And of course, this is the thing with Coriolanus. The kind of virtue that he has means that he doesn't take any of this for himself. It's all divided up against his followers. And then the people, seeing what he's managed to secure, are really jealous of all the spoils they've got, filled with regret that they didn't enlist, of course. Of course, the patrician knows best. And they resent Coriolanus, and they start to see his power as a threat to them because of this whole affair, which is kind of putting the blame on them a little bit. Yeah, so anyway.
Yeah. So, it's complicated, but Coriolanus occupies what is pretty clearly a highly traditional conservative position.
Totally.
On change. Wants to be in
charge. He's almost a Claudian. He's taken over from Appius Claudius with his...
and he's willing to embark on really harsh measures in order to obtain what he wants.
Well, yeah, it's brutal. His attitude is just ruthless.
Yeah. So, in terms of these provisions, he's, with the corn, he's like, look, keep it under guard and keep the price high. And he's like, because the plebeians need to know that they brought this on themselves. By not farming the land.
Parenting.
Whoa! Yeah. I think we'll have to start a new podcast for that
one. Sorry. Yeah. All jokes aside, no, I know. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. He basically puts it back onto the plebeians. He was like, they must understand that if they don't farm the land, they don't have food.
Yep.
And if they don't have food, then they have to buy it from us. And if they have to buy it from us, we set the price.
And this is where you can see that real divide. The fact that the patricians don't seem to be affected by this famine, presumably, I suppose, because they have enough wealth to buy what they need. But,
they're also in charge of the purchase of the grain supply.
Exactly,
so, they're running the store.
Totally.
So, guess
They've
who's not hungry?
Yeah, which is so, it's just so wrong. I can't imagine taking that sort of a stance. Yeah,
I don't see how it's a long-term strategy.
No.
Because Rome at some point still needs its own land.
Totally.
That it farms itself. It can't always be buying grain. Not everybody there is rich. And if you keep buying stuff but you're not producing things, that's going to be an issue
well,
for
exactly.
you down the track.
I mean, they can own all the land they want, but...
To what end?
Exactly, yeah, exactly. If nothing's happening on that land, what's the point? So, yeah.
Yeah, so this Coriolanus' speech against the people, well, that doesn't go so well. Yeah. So he gets up and does this thing, and, like, everybody's completely divided by it.
Yeah.
Obviously, some of the really hardcore patricians are like, yes, saying the things, speaking it like it is. You're such a Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, that's right.
And on the other hand...
I will make Rome great again.
Yeah.
I will build that wall.
I will. And we'll build it with the corn
That's right.
that we purchased from Sicily. Yeah. But anyway, and it is the best corn, I can tell you. Anyway,
yeah.
I could go on.
Yeah.
Never mind. So there's a whole bunch of patricians who are like, yes, finally, somebody's
right on,
speaking
brother.
the stuff.
Yeah.
And then a whole bunch of other patricians who are like, no, we need to be more humane about this. Like, this is about the Roman populace.
Yes.
And we need to be thinking more long term.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not going to... Violence here is not... the real answer. We need to think about
We've
how
already tried that a few times.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we got to this point.
Yeah, exactly.
But maybe kindness and reasonableness and giving some people some food to eat might be part of a good strategy here.
I think the Romans actually would have benefited from being familiar with a certain word that sprung up in our culture. Hangry. You're not going to get anywhere when the plebeians are hangry.
Yeah, you're not yourself when you're hangry.
That's right.
So, the plebeians... Well, to make things worse, because we now have this position of tribune of the plebs, guess who also is listening to this speech?
Yeah, I can guess.
The tribunes are not happy campers here.
No.
They are calling him out. They're saying he's a pest. He's a bane of the state. He's malicious against the population.
I take that call.
And the patricians need to stand up to him and introduce some sort of civil war against this guy in order to punish him, because he needs to be banished, he needs to be killed, because he's going to kill everybody if he keeps on this path.
That's a slightly more extreme version of what I have in Livy, which is that, as you said, that basically Coriolanus' position about let's just hold on to this grain until they give way about this whole tribune position and then we'll be happy. He does say that the senators think, really, maybe it is a little too harsh, and the plebeians, once they find out, are absolutely furious with him. There's no big speech or anything, but you can get the gist. And that basically they want... It's almost basically inciting them to war, as you said. Like, they just want to lay hands on him and tear him apart. And in Livy's account, it's at this point that the tribunes actually stop the plebeians from sort of acting violently right then and there, and basically say, let's call a trial instead. So, I mean, this is obviously typical Livy. He's very truncated version of events, but that's... I got some more details. Wait for it. No,
this is just getting started.
Yeah.
So the tribunes have come out and they're like, no this, no that, we've got to take him down, it's war, we've got to banish him, we've got to kill him, make it happen now. That's their kind of response in the public forum to this moment. And Coriolanus turns to them, he's like, you're a whole bunch of demagogues. I don't care anything about you, but if you keep going, this is going to be about actions, not words.
Ooh. Put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't have any.
He was like, wait a minute, I reckon I can take them down if it comes to combat. So this leads to some real issues. The Senate obviously is now, completely in tumult. The tribunes are angry, the senators are angry, Coriolanus is angry.
See, I don't know if you have this as well, but Plutarch actually gives another reason that Livy doesn't really go into for Coriolanus' anger, and that's his lost election for the position of consulship. Is that...
Yes.
Is that what you're about to...
Yeah, because it has been blocked. And the tribunes apparently were part of the cabal that ensured that it was blocked. Yeah. So he's particularly against the tribunes.
Yeah, because that's just it. He basically... I think, being Coriolanus, why wouldn't you? He's fairly confident about his chances in the election, and Plutarch loves to point out that this is before the day of buying votes, so it actually meant something then. Basically he's gone in, and he's shown his scars from his battles, which is always and
it's not like he doesn't have things to be proud of.
Absolutely, he's done things.
He's won a civic crown, and it's like he is well known for his exploits.
Yeah, and that's it. The people actually do seem to be a little bit torn about the decision themselves. It's
because he's just so Roman.
Yeah,
he represents
exactly.
all of the Roman values that they're like, oh, you know.
Yeah, and they seem to kind of feel a bit bad that they're not, 100% for him. But then the thing is, in Plutarch's account anyway, he sort of brings it on himself in their eyes. In that, on the day of the election, he turns up with like this massive entourage of patricians, and the plebeians are like, "Oh well, screw you, buddy."
They're like, you could be slightly less arrogant.
Yeah, and then that's what makes Coriolanus so upset. And as you say, like the Senate's insulted on his behalf, and this is where in Plutarch's account, because he's writing biography here, obviously, so he likes to go into this sort of thing. This is where Coriolanus gives into the sort of darker side of his nature. He turns to the dark side, like Anakin Skywalker before him, and basically gives into his passionate, angry, bitter feelings.
Yeah. He is now an angry man, and he's not afraid. Who knows it? Yeah. And as a consequence of this sort of eruption amongst the patricians and the tribunes and Coriolanus' speech, people start rushing out into the public and calling for an assembly of the people. So the Senate starts to acquaint the people in a more public sense with what has happened. And Marcus comes out, and so Coriolanus, and is asked to sort of state his position, and he just doesn't yield anything. He's like, this is what it is, and this is what it needs to be. The tribunes at that point get really, really mad, and they order the aediles to go and arrest him. And this is really interesting because we don't tend to think of the aediles. We think of them much later, but as we've talked about earlier, they are intimately connected with the tribunes at this point in their history.
That's true, yeah, exactly.
They sort of emerge out as this helping hand of the tribunes. So the aediles start going after him, and he's like, I'm not going with you anywhere. You're going to be kidding me. Haven't I made my point clear? You guys have got nothing on me. They're annoyed. And the patricians are looking at this thing happening, and they're like, oh my god, what is going to happen? And so a whole bunch of patricians get in front of Coriolanus and protect his body, so the aediles can't arrest him.
This is in Plutarch as well. Basically in Plutarch, they basically call him out and say, you need to answer. And he basically drives off and goes, I don't think so. I'm
going to hop on my chariot and ride out of here.
That's what I think of you. And that's when they go and physically try and
they try to physically restrain him. And he manages to rustle up enough support so that's impossible in that moment.
To me, this is just so bizarre. This idea of, people rocking up to basically make him come and answer for his crimes. I'm using my flesh rabbits. And then the patricians standing there going, oh no, you didn't.
I don't think so. What crimes?
Exactly, yeah.
Being a patrician, that's not a crime.
I pride myself on that above all things.
So this leads to some issues. So it's kind of like, next day, what are we going to do? Because, that's kind of headed things off of the past for now.
But the people are obviously still unsatisfied.
The people are very unsatisfied. And it's sort of played out in front of them where they've seen the aediles go to sort of arrest him, and then that fails. And they're like, okay, so the power of the people here is inadequate to counteract what is going on with this guy. Well,
in Plutarch's account, he mentions that the Senate are getting kind of scared, and the consuls are scared by this whole situation. And Livy, interestingly, says that it's around this sort of time. I mean, I'd say it's kind of hard because Livy's account is so truncated, but he does sort of refer to the fact that the patricians actually feel the need for a sacrificial lamb, and they sort of decide that Coriolanus might have to be it. Because he's
oh, I thought you were talking about an actual sacrificial.
No. I was that could happen in Rome, but no. As in, they feel the need to maybe
we'll need to push him off the rock.
Divorce ourselves from this guy because he's just too extreme. I mean, especially I don't know if Dionysius mentions this, but Plutarch sort of refers to the fact that a lot of younger patricians have sort of attached themselves to Coriolanus, and they seem to be sort of egging him on.
He does seem to have a loyal following of quite young chaps, as it were.
He sort of encouraged his worst feelings as far as Plutarch's concerned. I mean, Plutarch basically says, although Coriolanus has all these virtues and he prides himself on, being the best general and being a great soldier and blah, 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 he doesn't value being sort of mild, being moderate, and having that sort of gravity which is necessary if you want to be a statesman, not just a general.
Yeah. So he's got this sort of character flaw, if you like, built into him, which is definitely going to start working against him.
I
more
definitely
and more.
see some Star Wars analogies here.
Anakin.
Yeah.
The tragedy.
Yeah.
So we get to the next day, and according to Dionysius, the tribunes meet. And they have a sort of a public consultation with the people. Mm-hmm. And while this is going on, the Senate is actually having their own private meeting where they're trying to figure out how they're going to respond.
Yeah.
Because this situation is clearly still playing out, and they're like, what do we do? What should our position be?
Yeah.
Are we with Coriolanus or are we not? We need to figure this out.
Yeah, definitely.
And while this is happening, we have one Minucius, one of the older consuls. He comes forward.
I feel like
to
we've
speak.
heard his name before.
Yeah, I don't think he's consul of this year, but I think he's one of the. He's one of these grand old, the wise man sort of moments.
Yes.
And he's like, let's speak about this issue of Coriolanus.
Yeah.
And he's like, we need to keep in mind that the plebeians have a responsibility here as well. And he's like, and so he comes out, this is after the Senate deliberations, he's like, all right, let's talk real time, people. I'm a senator, you're some people, let's do this. And he's like, that there's been no crops, and that part of the reason why there's been no crops is because you didn't plant any.
Yes, but wouldn't that come back to that be warfare?
And he's like, okay. And he's like, and I acknowledge that, the land was laid waste by the enemy.
Oh, good. I was going to say, that seems a bit unfair.
Yeah. And he was like, and I understand that it's also partly our fault because we were incapable of supplying you because there were so many of you.
Yep.
But there were no resources.
Yep.
So we've got this famine, and it's partly your fault for not growing anything. It's partly the circumstances of warfare, and it's partly our fault because we couldn't help you out.
Yeah.
So we're sorry about that. So, what are we going to do? Now, let's get that issue off the table.
Yeah.
And he's like, now let's think about what's going on with this Coriolanus business.
Yes. This douche.
Yeah. And he's like, obviously there's resentment because you tried to secede.
Yes.
Let's think about that. Yeah. And
let's unpack that, shall we?
Yeah, let's go a little bit more deeper into that. Why did you want to do that? And
how did it make you feel?
Yeah. And, I see how you got there, but, think about it from a patrician's perspective, We
like having complete and utter domination.
Yeah.
We feel sad when we don't.
And, and it's not like we didn't negotiate, because now you've got this tribune, and, that's a good thing for you guys, and you should hold on to that, because, that's a positive.
You got one win.
But eventually he gets to this point where he's like, after all of these sort of niceties, he's like, you will find that we patricians have greater reason to accuse the people than you have to blame the Senate.
Whoa, hold the phone. Okay, none of this detail was in my account. This is pretty crazy.
And he's like, look, wait for it. And he's like, hold on, don't get offended just yet. Hear me out.
Calm
down.
I feel like I know that these speeches are obviously written, but I feel like that would be a highly dangerous thing to say to a violent mob.
Yeah. And he's like, look, think about how much Coriolanus has really done for you guys. Every time there's a battle, he's there. And he wins stuff, doesn't he? He wins it for you. He wins it for us. Yeah.
Sorry.
And it's like, he loves this country. Everything he does is done in the public interest. I want you to judge him on his actions, not on his words.
I do have a song. It's true. Everything I do it for you.
Pretty much. That's, I mean, I'm taking some liberal summarization of this speech because it goes for pages.
What, you mean my song wasn't a feature?
This kind of sums it up nicely as well. This is essentially what he's like, saying to them. He's like, look, he has done so much
Yeah.
for this. And he's like, I don't think you want to put him to death or banish this guy from the state.
Yeah.
Because he loves us. And, like, he represents excellence in the art of war.
Yeah, although you've got a lot more detail, as you tend to do with Dionysius, that's essentially the vibe that comes through both Livy and Plutarch. And that Plutarch talks about how during the negotiation phase, while they're trying to sort of mollify the plebs, the consuls make exactly that point, that, you know, are you sure you want to go extreme here? Couldn't you be a little bit more moderate? Couldn't you just calm down a little bit? And Plutarch actually says that apparently most of the plebeians were kind of thinking about, okay, maybe giving in.
Yeah.
Except that the tribunes then come along and sort of rise up again.
For it.
Yeah, and Livy also talks about the fact that the patricians address the plebs and beg them to let Coriolanus go. And this is really interesting, not because he's innocent, but as a favour.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's just like...
You know, this is hard times. You want a favour, we want a favour. You know, let's try and work this out, because we need to be kind.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the summary of this. And it's like, you know, he's... Essentially, the point that Minucius is trying to make is that his speech hasn't done any harm.
Yeah.
But his actions have always been in service of the state.
True.
So it's like, if we're going to judge him, let's judge him on what he has done.
Yeah, not
what he has said.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay. And like everyone's like, oh.
I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. So the people hanging around are like, oh yeah, that's a fair point. And then we have the tribunes, who have also been there.
Yes.
Those tribunes. Listening to this speech. And they're like, and they see that the people are like moved to this idea of moderation.
Yeah.
And this idea of the sharing of humanity and whatnot. And they're angry.
Yeah.
So angry. Because they're like, this is exactly the sort of thing that we're here for. Because you guys get duped all the time.
Yeah.
And we are not going to let that happen to you this time.
I mean, at this point, at least in both of my accounts, Coriolanus has yet to actually show up on his own behalf.
Oh, yeah.
He's still just like not caring. I don't know.
Yeah. So at this point, as far as I can discern from this narrative take, Coriolanus is present and he's sort of standing around looking very sort of like, you know, play the good guy, be silent. And so he's present at this.
Okay, well,
because things are about to unfold where he does say something.
So this is interesting, because in both of my accounts, I think this is meant to be around the same as yours. Coriolanus, one of the reasons I think why the plebeians remain unhappy with Coriolanus is because he doesn't show up.
Oh.
At least in Livy's sort of account. Whereas in Plutarch's account, at this particular point... he doesn't seem to be there, or if he is, it's not really clear, because the tribunes basically say, whoa, look, this guy has to answer for his charges, okay? And they basically say, they dwell on these sorts of things. Could he deny that he had instigated the Senate to violate the Constitution and abrogate the powers of the people? When summoned to appear before them, had he not refused? And finally, by insulting and beating the aediles in the forum, had he not done all in his power to incite the citizens to arms and bring about a civil war? And so they're basically...
And all of this sounds like he's not there.
It does a little bit, yeah. I mean, he does. You're right. He does show up eventually.
Well, I wonder, because like from the way that Dionysius' narrative unfolds, it seems like he was standing around the whole time while Minucius is speaking, because we have Gaius Sicinius Volutus. So Sicinius, one of these tribunes, who is just like not having this.
Yeah.
And he's like, no. And he's characterized by Dionysius as a most bitter foe of the aristocracy. Partly because he can see that if this plays out the way he thinks it's going to play out, the plebs are going to lose the tribunes, and his own power base is going to be gone. He's got some personal grievance here, because one, he wants to stay tribune because it's his only way into political power. But also, he's angry on behalf of the people. Because he can see how the same sort of coercive... kindly deception is going to play against the people in the long term. So he's like, he gets up. He's like, you know, let me speak on behalf of the people. Let me respond to this. Everyone's like, oh yeah. And he's like, look, thank you. consul, for all of your words, all of, like, your kindnesses, and, for actually speaking to us, down
our level.
yeah, rather than despising us for our lowliness. We appreciate that. And he's like, we need to think about this idea of, like, actions and words, don't we? And then he turns to Coriolanus, who's standing near the consuls. And he's like, why don't you clear yourself before the citizens in regard to what you said in the Senate?
Oh, dear.
Why don't you tell us about why we should offer you a milder penalty? And he's like,
ooh, should we pause there, or should we leave it on a cliffhanger? Ooh. Will Coriolanus save himself?
What will Coriolanus say? But wait for it. So he offers a few more questions here.
Yeah.
And he was like, I would not advise you to deny the fact, since you have a spirit above that of a man in private station.
Ooh.
He's like...
I think there's no denying that Coriolanus is arrogant.
Unless, indeed, it is seemly for the consuls and the patricians to intercede for you with the populace. Ooh. He's like, if you think it's okay for other people to speak on your behalf in your defense,
whatever,
to try and get you off a trial, then by all means, stay silent.
And that's exactly the kind of thing that Coriolanus would be like, never!
Yeah. So, a bit of a sophisticated bait moment here.
Yeah, well, Coriolanus
offered by Sicinius
definitely takes the bait in my account.
Yeah. Well, we will come back
to
the bait.
Tune in the future to hear about what Coriolanus has to say against his accusers. Will he manage to dazzle them with rhetoric, or will he condemn himself out of his own mouth?
Will he become a humane person with some consideration for his fellow man's plight? Or will he stand his ground and be like, no, I'm a patrician?
The ultimate in douchebaggery.
Stay tuned, find out.
Bye-bye.